Welcome to Lecture 24, in which we will cover the aorist and future passive indicative verbs. In this lecture, you will learn the formation of the aorist passive indicative and of the future passive indicative. These two tenses are built on the same tense stem and use similar tense formatives, so it's logical to treat them together. There is very little to learn in terms of grammar, so our focus will be on morphology, forming and parsing them, especially on recognizing the diagnostics of the two forms. We will first examine the aorist passive. The aorist passive indicative indicates undefined passive action in the past time. We translate it using the English helping verbs were and was. For instance, they were seen, or she was called. This chart gives the building blocks for the aorist passive indicative. Several features require comment, so let's work through the features slowly. Firstly, being a past tense, it requires the augment. Nothing unusual here. It's a past tense, so the first building block is the augment. Secondly, it is built on the aorist passive tense stem. This is usually the same as the root and as the present tense stem. If the tense stem differs from the root, it is likely that the verb will form a second aorist passive. More about that later. Thirdly, the tense formative they is added to the stem. This is the diagnostic for the aorist passive. When you see a they, odds are you are looking at an aorist passive. Let us make two technical observations about the tense formative they. Number one, the formative is actually the with an epsilon, but in the indicative, the epsilon has lengthened to eta to form they. In some other moods, the real tense formative they will appear. Number two, because they ends in a vowel, no connecting vowel is needed to join the personal endings to the tense formative. This is why there is no connecting vowel amongst the building blocks. And finally, the aorist passive uses secondary active personal endings. Of course, we would expect secondary endings because it's an augmented tense, and augmented tenses use secondary endings. The use of secondary active endings, however, is surprising, seeing as this is a passive voice. For now, just note that this is an anomaly. It uses the secondary active personal endings, even though it is the aorist passive. Here is the paradigm for the aorist passive indicative. Once you've learned the building blocks, the paradigm is completely regular. The one singular, elithane, is formed from the augment epsilon, the tense stem li, the tense formative they, and the personal ending ni, I was loosed. The two singular, elithes, is from the augment epsilon, the tense stem li, the tense formative they, and the personal ending sigma, you were loosed. The three singular, elithe, from the augment epsilon, the tense stem li, the tense formative they, and there's no personal ending for the three singular, he, she, or it was loosed. The one plural, elithemen, from the augment epsilon, the tense stem li, formative they, and personal ending men, we were loosed. The two plural, elithete, from the augment epsilon, tense stem li, tense formative they, and personal ending te, you were loosed. And the three plural elithesan, from the augment epsilon, tense stem li, tense formative they, and personal ending san, they were loosed. The three plural sometimes uses just ni as its personal ending, but much more commonly san. This is somewhat irregular, and you need to make a note that thesan is fairly diagnostic of the aorist passive indicative 3 plural form. There is a second aorist passive as well. The only difference between the first and second aorist passive is that the second aorist passive uses just eta instead of theta eta as its tense formative. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. Mounce uses the verb grapho to give a paradigm for the second aorist passive. The paradigm would be graphein, graphes, graphe, graphemen, graphete, graphesan. So just remember the difference between the first and second aorist passive. First aorist passive uses the tense formative they. Second aorist passive only uses eta as its tense formative. There is one more critical piece of information that you need. It concerns the square of stops. Once again, the square of stops. By now you realize how important it was to memorize the square of stops. It just keeps cropping up. When the tense formative they is attached to a verb stem ending in a stop, the final stop may change ahead of the theta. The good news is that they change in predictable ways. When they is attached to a stem ending in a labial, the labial changes to phi, yielding phi theta. If they is attached to a stem ending in a velar, the velar changes to chi, yielding chi theta. And finally, if the tense formative they is added to a stem ending in a dental, the dental changes to sigma. This is the most unusual of the changes, resulting in sigma theta. Let's look at 3 examples, one for each category. Firstly, the stem vlep ends in the labial p. When the tense formative theta is added, p becomes phi to produce the final form evlefthein, I was seen. Secondly, the stem theok ends in a velar, the kappa. Adding the tense formative they changes the kappa to a chi. This is how we get the final form ediochthen, I was persecuted. Thirdly, the stem vaptid ends in the dental delta. When the tense formative they is added, the dental delta changes to sigma to yield evaptisthein, I was baptized. Now let's consider the future passive indicative. It too has first and second future forms, like the aorist passive, but the second future is once again quite rare. We are going to look at both, but we will focus on the first future passive indicative. The meaning of the future passive is straightforward. It indicates undefined passive action in the future time. We translate it using the English helping verb will be, such as, it will be eaten. This chart shows the building blocks for the future passive indicative. It consists of the aorist passive tense stem, plus the tense formative, plus the connecting vowel, plus the primary passive personal endings. Let's run through those. It's the aorist passive tense stem, which is almost always identical to the root and to the present tense stem. We then add the future passive tense formative thase. It consists, as it happens, of the aorist passive tense formative they plus the ordinary future tense formative sigma. They've combined to give us thase, which is the future passive tense formative. It is also the key diagnostic for the future passive. Next comes the connecting vowel. Since the tense formative ends in a consonant, sigma, we need a connecting vowel to attach the personal endings. And as expected, the future passive uses primary passive personal endings. The primary endings are because it's not an augmented tense, and passive endings because it is the passive voice. Here is the paradigm for the future passive indicative. Once you've learned the building blocks, the paradigm is fairly regular. As usual, the two singular form is somewhat irregular. The one singular, lithesome, is from the tense stem li plus the future tense formative thes, connecting vowel omicron, personal ending me, I will be loosed. The two singular, lithese, is from the tense stem li, the tense formative thes, connecting vowel epsilon, and personal ending se. As you know fairly well by now, intervocalic sigma in the personal ending se drops out, and epsilon alpha iota contracts to eta with an iota subscript to give us lithese, you will be loosed. The three singular, lithesete, from the tense stem li, tense formative thes, connecting vowel epsilon, personal ending te, he, she, or it will be loosed. One plural, lithesometha, from the tense stem li, tense formative thes, connecting vowel omicron, personal ending metha, we will be loosed. Two plural, litheseste, tense stem li, tense formative thes, connecting vowel epsilon, personal ending ste, you will be loosed. And the three plural, lithesonte, tense stem li, tense formative thes, connecting vowel omicron, personal ending nte, they will be loosed. There is a second future passive. The only difference between the first and second future passives is that the second future passive uses just ace instead of thes as its tense formative. For the rest, the second future passive is exactly the same as the first future passive. Mounce uses apostal as the root in order to illustrate the paradigm. We would have apostolesome, apostolese, apostolesete, apostolesometha, apostolestheste, and apostolesontai. So the only thing to remember for the second future passive, the tense formative is ace instead of thes. Now, we can sometimes find some difficulty in distinguishing the aorist passive indicative from the future passive indicative. Here are three keys to making the distinction. 1. The aorist has an augment, but the future does not. Perhaps this is the easiest one. The aorist has an augment, the future does not. 2. The aorist tense formative is the, while the future tense formative is thes. The future passive adds the normal future tense formative sigma to the aorist passive formative the in order to get thes. Now there is one particular aorist passive form that can be confusing. Remember, the three plural has the personal ending san, so when you put this onto the tense formative you get thesan. Thesan is the aorist passive indicative three plural form. Almost any other time you see thes, it has to be a future passive indicative. 3. The aorist uses secondary personal endings, whereas the future uses primary personal endings. Both of these are fairly intuitive because they are respectively augmented and non-augmented tenses. So these are three things to look out for to help you to distinguish the aorist passive indicative from the future passive indicative. As usual, let's conclude by examining some of the aorist and future passives in exercise 24. The interaction that follows, we're going to explain how some of the aorist and future passives in exercise 24 are formed. We will select 10 of the aorist and future passive verbs in the exercise, somewhat arbitrarily, and divide them into their constituent parts so that you can see how they are formed. It's really helpful for you to get into the habit of doing this when you see forms you don't recognize. Usually, you'll be able to work it out if you can divide them into their constituent parts. Egerthe. Aorist passive indicative, third person singular from egiro. The meaning is he, she, or it was raised. The root is eger. We have the vocalic augment, epsilon is lengthened to eta. To the stem, the tense formative theta is added, and there's no personal ending for the three singular. This yields egerthe. Lalethesete. Future passive indicative, third person singular from laleo, meaning it will be said or it will be spoken. The root is lale. The formation is from the tense stem lale plus the future tense formative thes plus the connecting vowel epsilon plus the third person singular ending te. Lalethesete. Kerichthesete. Future passive indicative third person singular from keriso. The meaning is it will be preached. The root is actually kerig. The future tense stem is also kerig. We add the future tense formative thes, the connecting vowel epsilon, and the third person singular ending te. Now remember, when a tense formative beginning with theta is added to a stem ending in a vela, in this case gamma, the vela changes to chi, and this is how we get kerichthesete. Apekrithe. Aorist passive indicative, third person singular. The verb is in fact deponent. It means he, she, or it answered. The root is from apokrin. We have the preposition apo in compound. We would then have the augment epsilon. The stem krin. We add the tense formative the, and there's no personal ending for the three singular. Notice that the final ni of the stem krin has fallen out when the was added to it. Apekrithe. Sinechthesan. Aorist passive indicative, third person plural, they were gathered. The root is sinag with the preposition sin in compound. The building blocks, we have the preposition in compound, sin, then the vocalic augment, alpha, has lengthened to eta, then the tense formative the, and the third person plural ending, san. Now notice that the root ag ends in a vela, in this case gamma. Remember that when a tense formative beginning with theta is added to a stem that ends in a vela, the vela will change to chi. This is how we get sinechthesan. Agapethesete. Future passive indicative, third person singular from agapao, meaning he, she, or it will be loved. The root is agapa. The formation is from the tense stem agapa plus the future tense formative thes, connecting vowel epsilon, and third person singular ending te. Agapethesete. Klethese. Future passive indicative, second person singular, you will be called. It's from the root kale. The tense stem is actually modified. It is clay. We add the future tense formative thes, connecting vowel epsilon, and second person singular ending se. Then what happens, of course, is that the intervocalic sigma of the personal ending drops out, and epsilon alpha iota contracts to eta with the iota subscript. This gives us klethese. Eporefthesan. Aorist passive indicative, third person plural, the verb is in fact deponent. It means they went. The root is poref. The formation is from the augment epsilon plus the tense stem poref plus the tense formative, aorist tense formative, they, plus the personal ending for the third person plural, san, eporef thesan. Echaremen, aorist passive indicative, first person plural, from the verb chero, meaning we rejoiced. It is in fact deponent in this tense, hence we rejoiced. The root is char. The formation is from the augment epsilon plus the tense stem char plus the tense formative eta. Notice this is a second aorist passive, hence the tense formative is eta, not theta. And the first person plural ending men, hence echaremen, we rejoiced. Fove thesonte, future passive indicative third person plural, from foveome. The verb is deponent. The meaning is they will be afraid. The root is fove. The formation is from the tense stem fove plus the future passive tense formative thes plus the connecting vowel omicron and the three plural personal ending nte. This gives us fove thesonte. This is the end of lecture 24.